You have just landed on the dark side of the HODLmoon. Immutably amazing crypto wisdom. On today's episode, we talk to PJ from Blockheads about the current state of crypto. We get his take on DEXs, delisting privacy coins, how to fundraise in the crypto space, and what he thinks are the biggest obstacles to mass adoption. You are now orbiting the dark side of the HODLmoon. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, like, share, and comment to maintain your geosynchronous orbit over the dark side of the HODLmoon. HODLmoon! Alright, and we're back with another episode of Dark Side of the HODLmoon. I'm BlocKade here with Josh again. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great today. As you can tell, I've upgraded the podcast equipment, hopefully coming through much clearer than my tinny microphone of the last 15 episodes. We brought on an excellent producer for the show. Looking forward to introducing our new guest today. Let's get into it, Kate.
Yeah, I could definitely hear your mid-range and bass tones a little bit better. Why don't you introduce our guest today?
All right, today we're going to introduce PJ from Blockheads. So without further ado, PJ, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right, PJ, before we talk crypto and all those things, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, where you're from, what you studied, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a pretty, I would say, diverse background. I was starting with education, I was a bio major. Originally was pursuing medicine and didn't want to go that route after graduating. I got into sales and marketing for a biotech firm based in LA. And while I was working there, I also had a creative interest in the streetwear fashion world. And so I would do graphic design for different brands, and I came up with my own brand, and I would go to different trade shows. And all the while I was doing, the sales and marketing and consulting on the tech side for this company called Phenomenex. It was my activity, in my side project that kind of spurred me to go to law school. I had an interest in intellectual property law, mainly trademarks, because I was filing them for myself and for clients and friends that I was working with. And I always had I've always been entrepreneurial. So I felt that, knowing the law would help my business acumen. So I went to Howard Law in DC. After that, I did a program at George Washington at their IP program for obtain my LLM. And then I decided I wanted to go into finance. So I tend to get these urges or interests in random things, or maybe they're not so random, but I go full throttle into them. And so went into finance, worked at Morgan Stanley, did sort of a rotation in their program where I was doing private wealth management and some investment banking. And then I had a client that was a private equity investor. And so then I started to work with him, doing due diligence work, sourcing deals. I worked on a couple M&A transactions. And it was kind of a natural fit because I had the background in law. And since I was learning about, how to value companies, how to raise capital, how to put deals together, I then decided to start my own consulting firm called Salim & Solomon. And I started working a lot with startups and small businesses, just because that was my passion is to help people, and I have passion for business and entrepreneurialism. So I was just taking my knowledge that I had from sales, marketing, finance, and law, and you could call it operations more or less, because I understood how businesses are valued and how they should operate, good ones at least. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years now.
Okay, cool. So it looks like, you sounds like you're quite a Renaissance man. So you started studying medicine, got into law, and then you said IP. For our listeners, I think that's intellectual property. Then you got into finance and did M&A, which is mergers and acquisitions. I can't speak today. And so you're into the finance world, and then it seems like that's where you got into crypto. So how did you go from traditional finance to dabbling in the crypto world?
For me, it was more along kind of the traditional kind of philosophical cypherpunk attitude that you can see in the Bitcoin white paper, just to kind of a little bit of that anti-establishment tinge where, you're aware of what's going on in the world and the system and the flaws, and, how can those be improved? That's what really kind of drew me into the crypto space. It was Bitcoin. I did an online course. I'd heard about Bitcoin while I was in law school. And when you're in law school, you don't really have time.
What year is this that you heard about it?
I heard about Bitcoin probably like 2009. I heard about it very early on. And I did, when you're in law school, you don't really have time for much else. So I didn't really pay much attention to it. I just knew about it in the context of, it's used on the dark web, Silk Road, just the negative connotations. And I didn't really think much of it. I didn't really deep dive into it until 2014. I had a friend who was really into Ethereum and had invested in Ethereum, and he was telling me, saying, you got a legal background, you really need to look into this, you need to look into smart contracts. And I was like, okay, yeah, sounds interesting. But it wasn't until a year later that I did this online course. It's offered through Princeton. It's the Bitcoin and blockchain technologies, and that would really open my eyes. And so once I, read the Bitcoin white paper, did that course, and I'm not like a coder or anything like that, but just understanding the principles of it, I said, wow, this is revolutionary. So that's when I really decided I really want to work in this space and get more involved.
Okay, interesting. So, what kind of kept you in crypto is kind of maybe the politics of it, the sound moneyness, the sound money argument. Would that be correct?
Yeah, what was it that made the penny drop, so to speak? So you kind of were aware of it for a while, and then was it this course itself? And then what part of the course was it that maybe really clicked with you?
I think it was just the fact that the soundness of money, the soundness of the technology, removing of the middleman, right? Just that philosophy of, because when I was in, it was a few things, but one thing that really resonated with me is that once I understood the whole principle of, removing these third parties, these intermediaries, it made me think of Napster, and just how that revolutionized the music industry. And I saw a lot of analogies between that and in general, more so Bitcoin. And I analogize that is to the, the financial version of Napster. So it was really that. It was really Bitcoin.
It sounds like it's kind of a trifecta of all those things: the money, the tech, the decentralization, the politics. Interesting. I think that's a pretty similar story for a lot of our guests that we've had on the show. So I'm curious, Libra's been in the news a lot. What is your take on Libra? What do you think about it?
There's multiple layers to it. I think on one layer, I like the idea of it. I think that it's, technology is about pushing humanity to efficiency, to, more efficient systems. And I think that, a sound cryptocurrency, I'm not saying that it's going to be Libra or Bitcoin or any of these other things out there, but, digital money, a cryptocurrency, I think is the future, right? I think Facebook, Libra and their affiliates, they're gonna, if they are able to pass, this regulatory oversight, it's going to be a game changer. And I think it's going to dramatically change kind of the blockchain landscape as we know it, because one of the biggest issues we have now in the blockchain space is, user adoption. And there's been the kind of like, there's like multiple camps, but you have one camp that is really like blockchain centric, blockchain focused, and wants to lead with blockchain. But the general average consumer or person out there really doesn't understand blockchain, and it really doesn't matter to them. It's just a matter of like, does this technology, does this app or whatever, does it do something for me? Does it solve a problem? I don't care how it works. I just needed to solve a problem. And I think the advantage that Facebook has is obviously its user base. And so it'll be for them to transition into adopting the use of their cryptocurrency, I think it dramatically changes the landscape. And for better or worse, it's going to make Facebook in a lot of ways the most powerful company, or more powerful than it already is. So,
it's pretty interesting. We did a show about this, and honestly, I think it's a pretty scary prospect to just imagine one single corporation that would have the ability to scale to basically billions of people very quickly. I think that the governments are scared about that, and I don't think it will get off the ground. I think there will be too much resistance from the powers that be. So let's see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see it failing for those very reasons, and it is very scary that one company can scale that quickly and know, everything about you and what you're doing and what you're spending your money on. But I don't know. I mean, is that, in the landscape of technology and privacy, can we prevent that? Maybe now. I don't know, 10, 20 years from now, if that's inevitable.
It's interesting. My theory is that a lot of people will be onboarded onto crypto, and then they will start to actually learn about it through kind of osmosis. And then in a couple of years, they'll come full circle back to the pure decentralized kind of, it's not anonymous, let's be honest. It's a public ledger, Bitcoin, but it's at least it's pure in the sense that it's not controlled by a single third party, or even if it's a group of third parties like Libra. So anyway, that's an interesting topic. We always like to talk about that. There are some other topics that we always like to talk about. So what you take on, let's say the crypto landscape in general at the moment. You've been around the game for quite a few years now. So how have you seen it change over the last few years, and where do you see things heading now?
Well, yeah, I mean, we all saw this, we're all in this post ICO phase right now. And it's a matter, what's going to happen. You have these projects that have been building or buildle, or however you want to phrase it. And it's, we're trying to find where's this killer app or this killer use case beyond Bitcoin. I've seen it shift. I always say, I'm sure you guys heard this before, as Bitcoin goes, the market goes. And not just in terms of pricing, the price of other cryptocurrencies, but just, attendance at conferences, access to funds. And I think that's one of the big problems I'm seeing right now, is that a lot of projects, the funding is now starting to reflect more traditional finance in terms of like startup funding, VC funding. I think companies, founders were really misled by what happened during the ICO phase. And so now it's a matter of like, who has the grit to stick it out. And it's challenging. So I think we're in a challenging state right now. The market is challenged.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the post ICO Wild West, I think the Wild West of the ICO game is long past. So you've got a background in law. So I kind of want to know what your thoughts are on crypto regulations, both here in the US and abroad. And it could be talking about whatever you really want to talk about: exchanges, KYC, other regulatory issues, delisting privacy-focused coins. I'll let you take it wherever you want to go, but do you have thoughts on crypto regulations and where they're going?
Yeah, I think in general, here in the US, it's becoming a hindrance. It has been a hindrance, I would say, from the standpoint that, early on there wasn't really much clarity in terms of, whether we're talking about how are these going to be taxed. Then, whether, what are these, how are these categorized? Are they commodities? Are they securities? I think the US, we've really dropped the ball on that one. And I think other localities, places like, whether it's, I don't know, some of these small principalities that are just set up as tax havens, mind you, or other, governments that are more friendly towards crypto. I think we're dropping the ball in that sense. And I think I don't know if it's too late, but it seems like that we're missing a big opportunity there to kind of like lead this revolution. And I think that we should take a more pro crypto stance, pro blockchain stance.
I mean, I agree. I agree strongly with what you said there. I mean, it's hard to use cryptocurrency when you're supposed to log every transaction as a taxable occurrence. And I mean, we are seeing some bright spots with Wyoming kind of being pretty crypto friendly and a few other states. But yeah, if the federal government doesn't loosen up things and make things clearer, yeah, capital is gonna flee, and companies are gonna go to more hospitable areas.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And what are your thoughts about decentralized exchanges then? So that's quite an interesting space that was really, really, like, I would say, a hot topic at the end of 2017, start of 2018, but never really seemed to get any kind of adoption in the market. So what do you think about decentralized exchanges? Is there just no incentive for the creators of the decentralized exchange, so they just never really make it a competitive product? What are your thoughts about decentralized exchanges?
Well, I'm for them. I worked with a client, Total. They're a DEX. They started as a DEX aggregator. I think they're now a full-fledged DEX. So I like the idea of decentralized exchanges. I think the problem that they have is that the value, unless we're going to look at just ease of access of trading, these crypto assets, the value is more. There's a philosophical value to it, right? The fact that you own your keys, you own your crypto. It's not sitting on some other exchange, right? And that's a sophisticated point. So more or less, the challenge they're part of the challenge that they have in terms of adoption is you need your client base has to be somewhat sophisticated to really understand the value of that, right? Because if somebody's new onboarding into the crypto space, they're probably going to use, I mean, more than 99.9% positive they're going to use Coinbase, or they're going to use Kraken, or one of these other exchanges, right? So there's that challenge. And then I think the other challenge is just, I think we're going to see more of it to come, is like, are they in violation of security laws if they're allowing users to trade what the SEC might deem as unregistered securities? So you're seeing some other exchanges that have delisted different projects that are, like Coinbase, for example, because they're sort of like this golden child, right? They're very particular in terms of what projects get listed there with the DEX. Who's going to bear that responsibility, right? Who's going to be liable for that? I think, I don't know if they're thinking about that, but I'm thinking about that, like, oh, that's a kind of a tricky situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of sense. That's one of the topics we wanted to expand on a little bit. What do you think about the delisting of some of the privacy coins? So, there's a big debate in the crypto space about privacy being central, especially in the sense of it being a decentralized approach to finance, like decentralized finance, DeFi. But when you've got privacy coins, it adds that extra layer of security and anonymity to transactions. And this really seems to terrify the regulators. So what are your thoughts about all of the delisting of the privacy coins that have happened recently?
It's one of those things, it's one of those things that government is going to tend to overreact. I mean, I understand the notion of, okay, why governments want to delist or want to prevent the proliferation of privacy coins that may be very, completely anonymous or very close to full anonymity, and the inability for them to track transactions. Okay, in principle, I understand that, and in practice, though, the amount of money that's laundered through cryptocurrency is insignificant to the amount of money that's laundered, through U.S. dollars, right? So is it an overreaction? I definitely believe so. I definitely believe in the idea of the principle of privacy. And there's certain things that, technology is a tool. And I think part of the things, and this is one of the things I learned in law school, a lot of times when you have new technology or you have these issues come up, people who are against a topic or a technology or some right or whatever the case might be, they will often say, we're doing this to protect children. They'll often say, oh, we're trying to prevent, trafficking of sex slaves, trafficking of children, and those sort of abuses. So they'll immediately, it's an emotional play, and they'll get the general public to react. When in actuality, you banning this technology or you banning this is not going to prevent that activity from happening. That's going to happen regardless, and it is deplorable, disgusting. However, we shouldn't ever use prohibition as a means to prevent the benefits that come with this technology, and the benefits outweigh the negatives. I mean, should we ban US dollar because people, traffic drugs and children or whatever the case may be with dollars? No. Should we ban Ford from making vans because, kidnappers use vans to kidnap people?
Yeah,
no.
should we ban knives because some
Right.
people can be stabbed? Yeah.
Well, they're doing that in the UK. Yeah. Should we ban vape pens because a couple of kids bought illegal Chinese vaping supplies that were unregulated?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. It's like logical fallacies from the media and the government are a dime a dozen, but sometimes if you keep hearing that over and over again, people believe it. Yeah, half the time I talk to people about Bitcoin, they either say, "Oh, it's magical digital money," or it's like the cash. It's the money used by criminals. And
Right.
most people don't know it because if all they do is listen to the mainstream media, they don't understand it at all.
Right.
Yeah, it must be quite scary for a lot of people if they don't really understand the tech and they see it as this like privacy money that only criminals use. Then it actually scares away lots of potential people from joining, into this brilliant revolution that I see is going to change the world, especially with Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is going to be the new gold standard, new gold 2.0. But when it comes to these scare stories, there was a recent scare story in the news last week about there was a video site that people were paying in Bitcoin, and it was just all of the words in the article were really, really scary. They were like, it's used by pedophiles, it's used by traffickers. And I would not be surprised if, crypto sentiment follows those types of stories in the mainstream. And it's a real big shame because, and I've said it before, it's a public ledger, fellas. Like Bitcoin is not great for criminals.
Exactly.
In fact, it's the opposite.
Actually, I saw that story, and I think they caught those people because they paid in Bitcoin. I actually think they were tracked through their Bitcoin addresses.
Exactly. So there's a strong argument to be made that actually, if there are any really nefarious things going on the Bitcoin network, that in fact it's better for law enforcement, and it makes it much more transparent for law enforcement to basically find who the bad guys are. And they only really need to start looking if there's any bad behavior. Otherwise, they won't really need to pay attention to it. So I think there are actually strong arguments for more adoption of Bitcoin rather than less adoption of Bitcoin. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on to a different topic.
Okay.
And let's make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more fun. So, PJ, what are your thoughts on the market for the next, let's say, the next year in 2020? Are you bullish? Are you bearish? How do you feel about the overall markets in the cryptocurrency space?
You know what? I don't want to disappoint you. I really don't know. I mean, I just think there's a lot of things that I thought would happen that would kind of lead to, more participation from kind of like these institutions. We've always been, I'm sure you guys have heard about all these institutions that are sitting on the sideline waiting to invest in Bitcoin and other cryptos. I think we're going to see more of the same. This next in 2020. I don't know what news is kind of pending that's going to lead to broader investment. I just think that it also depends on where kind of the global economy goes. We're hearing rumblings of global recession. Who knows? I think the price of Bitcoin is kind of going to stay kind of in this belt between, say, 6,000 and 15,000. I don't think it'll reach up to the high point. I think it was in, what was it, 2017, or end of 2016. I can't remember, but yeah, I think it's gonna more or less be flat. I don't, there could be some growth, but I don't see it being kind of astronomical where people have been calling for like 100,000. I don't think it's going to happen just yet.
Okay,
All right, cool.
Yeah, you're a little bit more bearish than most of our guests, but I like hearing different perspectives. I'm a little more bullish myself, and Josh is kind of got a wild range of lows and highs, but
yeah, I think the low is going to be 6K, and I think it was going to happen relatively soon. And then I think we're going to see an explosion all the way up to like 86,000 in 2020, especially post-halvening. So the halvening is coming up in around May of next year. I think that this is a reliable trend that you can basically take it home to the bank. What are your thoughts about the halvening? Do you think that it will have the same effect as it's had the previous times, or do you think that was just a unique event for those times, and the past doesn't equal the future, that type of thing?
I'm not going to say that it can't, that the past won't be prelude, but I think there were some other factors going on. I think, I would say this. I do think, say if there is wider spread economic issues in kind of like the Western economies, I do think that, or in Asia, China, I do think that we'll see more. You could see rapid investment, and I do think, okay, that 86,000 or 100,000, that is a possibility. I just don't know, if I just don't know if we're ready for that. If there is an infrastructure in place that, okay, if people invest in Bitcoin, is it more of like, or buy more Bitcoin, is it more to store their wealth, or is it because there's a need to use and transact in this currency? And that there's a couple different scenarios that could play out. So, to answer your questioning, whether the halvening will, lead to, a big price jump, it's possible. It's possible. I could see it happening, but I think it would depend on a couple other factors, external factors.
all right, cool. I got a question. You kind of mentioned about this when you were talking about Libra, but we talk a lot about obstacles to mass adoption. So I'm kind of wondering, what do you think is the biggest obstacle to mass adoption? Do you think it's education? Do you think it's having easier user experience, user interface, more user-friendly wallets and exchanges? What is preventing people from getting into the market?
I think it's the use case. I think user interface that's improved. I mean, the user interface matters if someone were to create like a decentralized social network, right? I think user interface would matter because, social networks are something that's commonly used. So if you're going to have a competitor to, and I don't know how feasible a decentralized social network is, but just as for sake of argument, it would have to be something that would be as appealing as a Facebook or an Instagram or TikTok, right, for people to use it. So I think it depends on kind of the market that you're in and the use case, and the competitors there place kind of more emphasis on how good your UI has to be. But I think just in general, I think it's the use case. I think as far as cryptocurrency, digital money, it's hard for us in the West to transition to it because there's dollar dominance, there's euro dominance, there's existing currencies that people are accustomed to and in their mindset and probably objectively more stable, right? But in other places where, like, say, Venezuela, Iran, where they're experiencing economic turmoil, people are turning to cryptocurrencies, right? So I think the use case is money. The first one is just a matter of how do we transition to that here in the West or in Asia or broader things. I think Asia, in terms of like being set up for that, is easier, because if you look at like China, everything is done on your phone, mobile, right? I think now in the US we're starting to get used to that. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we talk about Venezuela a lot on the show. Yeah, the US dollar is relatively stable, but in Venezuela, Dash and Bitcoin Cash were kind of a crypto lifeline for a lot of people, literally saving lives for sure.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. So we've covered a lot already, but we haven't yet talked about probably the main part of this show, which is your company, right? So let's get into your company a little bit, and you could tell the listeners about Blockheads and what it does and how you help them and all of their good stuff. So you can take that where you want. So maybe you can introduce how you got involved with Blockheads, or how you started it, and who you've worked with and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, no problem. So Blockheads, so I mentioned earlier, I started my consulting company, Salim & Solomon, and I worked, since I had a background in finance and law, and as well as sales and marketing, I started doing a lot of operations consulting with different companies, and that would span from helping them raise capital to structuring contracts to to things as mundane as creating pitch decks or what have you, or managing their accounting, managing their books. I then fell down that crypto rabbit hole, and I wanted to work with blockchain projects. So I started consulting with a number of different projects. One of the early ones that I worked with was one is called Receipt Chain. Another one is Follow Coin. There were a couple different projects that I got involved with, and then I started working with a company they became a client, Melrose PR, and they were a crypto PR firm. And I ran the operations there for over a year. And while I was doing, running operations there, I really saw a lot of different projects come on. And one of the issues that I noticed is that there were some great technologies, but they were having issues finding users, as well as, growing their community. So, I decided that I would focus on community building and user acquisition. So that's what we do. That's the primary focus of Blockheads is growth hacking, user acquisition, and community building for blockchain projects. That's our real focus there. I got a team of experienced community managers. I understand marketing strategy very well, having worked in a number of different industries, and really, working in kind of the fashion space. That's where I get a lot of my creativity, and I, understand the music space as well. So I use a lot of the kind of strategies that are used in music and fashion and bring them over into the blockchain kind of tech space.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We see a lot of, I've seen a lot of great projects that have little to no marketing or bad marketing, but if they had good marketing, maybe they'd be a big project. On the other hand, I've seen horrible projects that are basically vaporware with amazing marketing, but really no project. So I think it cuts both ways.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's awesome that you're trying to help good projects find users. Me and Josh have this great podcast, and we're trying to scale up and find some more listeners. So maybe you've got some advice for us.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk about that offline, but I mean, I think what you guys are doing is great. I think when it comes to just to dive for a second with, podcast, it's just creating content and being consistent. The users will come. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, we immutably broadcast every week. Don't worry.
Yeah, we've been pretty religious about that. We've been broadcasting every week, at least once a week, sometimes even twice a week, if we can fit it in. So we're just trying to improve the podcast week by week. Hopefully the listeners are enjoying the guests that we bring on, and hopefully the topics are always interesting. So that's good. We'll talk about that a little bit more off air. But just to drill down a little bit more into what it is that Blockheads does, obviously it's marketing. But, when you're a marketer, it's kind of a double-edged sword, like Cade mentioned. If you do a really good job and you get thousands of users, do you feel like sometimes you're obligated to do lots of due diligence on the project that you're working with? Because, again, you might be promoting a project that you don't know too much about, because as a marketer, you're running a business, you want to work with clients, you want to help them, you're always working on, let's say, a good faith basis. You expect them to have good faith and they expect you to have good faith. So you don't really want to challenge the ethics of the people that you're working with, right? So how do you juggle that dilemma of, especially now that you've got the knowledge of blockchain that you have, when you see a project that you think, all right, this is nearly going to be on the edge of, I don't know, is it even necessary to have a token? What do you do in those situations that are really kind of a bit of a moral dilemma that perhaps maybe 2 years ago it wouldn't have been a dilemma because everyone was new and you didn't have the experience? But now what do you do with the clients that you think, all right, go back to the drawing board on the tech side? Do you ever have that?
You know what? I do. I try to avoid the moral dilemmas because, I know enough about the space. I've worked in finance. I can spot, the sham projects, the vaporware pretty quickly. So I do my best to avoid those. And I can say that I haven't the projects that I've worked with have been legit, have, technology, at least have an MVP. And that's kind of like the main thing that I look for is, do you have an MVP? And then really I look at the people around them. I think where a lot of projects nowadays, where they're going to hit a wall, and what I've seen is that they can have tech, they can have an MVP, because if you have some good funding, you can always find, a team of developers, right? Even if you have decent funding, you can find, the talent out there, the tech talent is there. It's the leadership is what I've noticed, is that if you don't have a CFO, if you don't have a COO, or if you don't have somebody on your team that has experience in the marketing that you're in the market that you're going into, that's kind of more of a red flag now. I think back in the ICO phase, like Cade mentioned earlier, you've seen a lot of bad projects with good marketing, and they were able to raise a lot of money, and then they didn't deliver, right? And so a lot of people are left holding the bag. I think we're beyond that now. I think now it's people can build, projects or build an MVP to show that, hey, invest in us. Now the problem is the leadership. Is that does your CEO have experience in this market? Do you have a team of people? Do you have advisors? Do you have connections in that industry to grow? Because that's traditionally how things are done. Traditionally, if you have a project and you don't have a CTO, a strong CTO, a strong engineer, or you don't have, connections, or if you don't have people that have experience in that market, nobody's going to invest in you. So I think that's kind of the new red flag that I see now, is how strong is your team?
Yeah, that's important, I think. And we're going beyond just having like a team list with a link to LinkedIn, right? We're talking about real experience that is verifiable. I think that's really important. And having the key people in place, like a CTO, CFO, COO, as well as a CEO that actually knows what he's talking about, you can get a good combination of the C-suite, and they could really, go a long way. I agree with that. It is about people. Having good people that know the industry really well, back to front, is important. I completely agree. I couldn't agree more, actually.
All right, yeah. Well, that's all interesting, but I need to hear something a little bit more spicy. It sounds like you've done a good job of choosing good projects, but without specifically naming any companies or people, can you tell me about any crazy teams or crazy projects that pitched ideas to you that you had to turn down?
There's been a lot of that. I think you can, you can go to any conference and you can find somebody trying to sell something crazy. I'm trying to think now of what's the craziest, wildest one.
Yeah, one or two that stick out to you. I'm sure you have at least one or two.
Someone was trying to use a blockchain to, it was something to do with like shrimp, like a shrimp farm, something that had like, and it wasn't even like necessarily with supply chain and understanding that. It was just really basic and it didn't make any sense. So that was one of them. There was a shrimp farmer out there that was trying to raise money, and then there's people that are trying to use blockchain. Not so much now, but I do remember there was another project where someone was trying to they were trying to do something in entertainment with movies and block. I wish I had something new offhand. I would have something for you. I could go back into my notes, and there's been some crazy things out there. It'll come to me. But shrimp farming, that was one.
Yeah, it sounds like it was even related to inventory tracking. It was just something completely off the wall. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, maybe someone just gave him advice like, this is the new way to raise money, so just put the word blockchain shrimp, and then there you go.
There was somebody that was recently trying to raise money around gaming and blockchain, but the game was something that was on a piece of paper. It was like gibberish.
That's funny.
There's a lot out there.
All right, I think we can transition to a topic that actually piqued my interest when you mentioned it, and that was about fundraising, because a lot of people are interested in fundraising. How do you approach VC funds? How do you approach angels? How do you go for the private rounds in crypto sales? What would you recommend is the right steps that people should take? How should they protect themselves when they're being approached by people that are looking to raise funds? How can you verify their authenticity? And also on the other end, if you are a project and you want to raise funds, what are the right steps that you'd recommend people take in order to find those good investors?
I think it starts with building relationships, right? I think if you want to get on the radar, you first do your research into the VCs that you're looking at and see, what have they invested in, what markets are they interested in, to determine if there's a fit. And then you got to take a soft approach. You can't just send an email and say, hey, this is what we're raising in our Series A or our seed and whatever. It's almost like, if you're dating and you're pursuing someone, you have to, there has to be some finesse to it. So
I just say, here I am, check me out.
Right. Exactly. Well, it depends what you're looking for, right? That could work. But when it comes to, the venture capital world, you have to build a rapport. So it's maybe, going to a pitch event, and meeting somebody there, doing your research. You got to kind of stalk them in a way. I know that sounds bad, but you have to kind of do.
Dating analogy is really interesting, I think. It's right. Quite an interesting one. And you just made me have this idea, like, what about a Tinder for projects looking for quick funding and
Tinder VC? There you go.
Tinder VC, that would work. Like you just you get 30-second elevator pitch. You have to record your video, and then basically people swipe right or swipe left if they like your idea.
Right.
That would work, man. I think we've just launched a new business right now.
I think so.
One night capital injection, baby.
Yeah. So I think, and this is if you don't have a relationship, because a lot of money is trust, right? And a lot of times, if you're not in that circle, you have to figure out a way to get in and not be off-putting. And I've seen a lot of things that don't work when people are overly aggressive and just not, as cliche as it sounds, it's really about the relationship, in that it's more than just money. It's like, well, what is this going to do for their portfolio? What is this going to do for them long term? right? So it's really figuring out a way to create a relationship. And once you have, and then not only do you have to do that, because it's a two-part problem, it's the relationship and it's the product. Sometimes if you have a product that's just mind-blowing, everybody's going to be coming after you, right? But if it doesn't immediately scream bells and whistles, you have to have a good product. You're going to, people are going to want to see some sort of traction, right? So you have to do a lot of work. And I mean, quite honestly, if you have something good, you want to take it as far along as you can before you accept any money, because really you want to have more equity for yourself. So I think that's, that would be my advice is, money is, raising capital. You should look at that. A lot of times people look at it as kind of like, because it's glorified, Silicon Valley, all this, and people look at it as that's kind of like the number one option or something I need to check off the box on. When in reality, you should take it as far as you can. And if you can avoid taking it, you should, quite frankly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Would you say then, if you could describe, I don't know, a perfect VC funding stage where you just give up the right amount of equity and get the right amount of funding. Let's say it's a project that is looking just to target the United States market. It's already got a team of 20 people.
Mm-hmm.
They've just got enough to basically pay payroll for the next 12 months. They've got a decent burn rate. And what would you recommend them do? Would they go the VC route? Would they just keep grinding themselves for the 12 months? There's a lot of dilemma that a lot of the projects are in this position where they've got like a medium-sized team. They've got enough money for about a year. Would you recommend they just burn through that money and try and make it work without any funding? Or do you think that 12 months, that's critical and you've got to get funds into the company now and you've got to start raising money? The CEO should switch his hat to the raising money hat. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that situation, and not knowing more details or what the prospects are in terms of, pipeline and, customer acquisition. I mean, I think the CEO, if you're at a year point, and, you also have to consider, okay, well, what if we lose customers? What if we lose clients, right? And then that, how much time do we really have, right? So I think at that point, the CEO has to really look at getting a capital injection, and then hand things over to the COO to really kind of run and operate the business to maintain and acquire more. So you have to fight that war on two fronts. I mean, it is a huge dilemma, but I think it goes back to having a strong team to kind of get out of that situation. I think you are a situation where you do need to raise capital when you got 12 months of burn left, because things don't always go according to plan in the startup world. So yeah, today it might be 12 months, but there could be an unforeseen cost that happens, or you lose a client, right? So yeah,
that's true, especially in crypto when many projects have actually just raised Ethereum and then they haven't actually.
There you go.
They don't have the right treasury services in place. They
right.
haven't got a custodial partner that can kind of mitigate the volatility a little bit.
Right.
And I saw that myself firsthand. We raised a lot of money in the project I was working, and then the Ethereum price crashed from around 2,000 down to 70. So that was a bit of a shocker. When you had 34,000 Ethereum on a couple of ledgers, and then suddenly they're not worthless, but they are worth a lot less than they were. So it was quite interesting to see the panic about on the C-suites, their mind about how do we handle this. Whereas if they would have just planned it a little bit better, like you've mentioned, then that could have been avoided. So that's quite an interesting take that you've got there. And I've got another question. It's about what you'd recommend new products, how they should approach the market, new projects, I should say, in cryptocurrency space. Because, like you mentioned, 2017 was all about the ICO. 2018 was a long bear market with, let's say, some new experimental words that were thrown around like IEO and STO, which didn't really deliver the same amount as as an ICO did for projects. And then it's gone full circle back to basically VC funding and exchange for equity rather than tokens, because look, tokens don't really give equity to anybody, and people have realized that. So if you're a new project and you've got a good idea, is it even possible in 2019, 2020 to go forward with your idea and raise money in a decentralized way? Or do you think you've got to go back to the traditional raising capital routes?
I think you can. I think both. I think what we're seeing now and what that crypto winter did is kind of weed out the weak projects. I think now you have to have a solid project, and the money can come from decentralized sources, or crypto investors, these crypto millionaires or crypto billionaires, if there's still any out there, right? Or traditional finance. I think you have your option. I think it's about the quality of the project, it's the quality of the team, and what problem are you solving. I think that should be the important focus and kind of the lesson we take away from what we've seen over the past 4 years.
That makes sense. So then that leads to the next question, which is, what do you think are the biggest problems remaining to be solved in cryptocurrency then? Because that would be a business idea right there.
Yeah, I think right now, being in California, I think what I would like to see is I think in the cannabis industry and just the way the state regulations are set up, I think blockchain provides a perfect solution when it comes to tracking, from seed to store cannabis, because you now have it's legal in the state recreationally, and you have a lot of cannabis businesses popping up. The state mandates that all transactions involving the plant, the flower, are tracked. There was a system, I forget what it's called. There was a company that won a contract, but I think blockchain as a supply chain solution is perfect for this industry. And I'd love to see someone step to the forefront there. I think that's a huge opportunity. I think identity tracking is also another huge opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there's already a lot of projects that are doing inventory tracking, so maybe one of them could tackle it, or maybe it could be a new project as well.
Yeah, especially that particular industry, that really requires, I think, a US company. There are lots of Asian projects that are working on, supply chain management blockchains, but because they're Asian, I think they can't even go to even if it's medical marijuana, they couldn't do anything even regarding cannabis at all, because of the perception of marijuana in Asia is pretty bad, even if it's not founded. So if you've ever lived in Asia, the words marijuana, you might as well be like the worst criminal in the world. They will lock you up for.
Yeah,
so
you say marijuana. You say marijuana in Korea, you might as well be saying meth or cocaine or what worst thing you can think of.
Yeah, it's just basically an education issue, because the science is pretty clear that marijuana is not really harmful, especially in comparison to, let's say, alcohol, which is ubiquitous and everywhere. So anyway, we don't want to get too political. Maybe that's for another show. Well, that's an interesting project. If anyone's listening out there and you're in the United States and you've got the wherewithal to basically take action, then there you go. You've got like a nice business idea that you can chase down. So, PJ, I think we're getting towards the end of our podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on so far. We always like to wrap up with a Bitcoin price prediction, but you kind of alluded to that earlier, so that's fine. Kate, do you have any more questions? And also, PJ, do you have anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I got one other question about BlocKade. So I know you've got a varied background in medicine, like design, fashion, law, finance. And I see you do marketing, media management, growth hacking, like you mentioned, PR and content creation. You also do operations consulting. So I'm wondering what your business primarily does, what you prefer to do, and if you're still using your legal background a lot are you using your law degree at Blockheads, or is it more in the PR and operations field?
My law degree comes in more. I mean, from a marketing standpoint, it influences what are we going to say and how are we going to say it regarding this project, especially here in the U.S. Other than that, it doesn't really play a role unless I'm doing something, finance or legally, explicitly law related when it comes to contracts. So business sort of ebbs and flows. So in terms of category, like for the past year and a half, it's been almost exclusively marketing kind of strategy, growth hacking, community building. There's a couple projects that we're pitching out to do more on the operations, operations side, more kind of like the interaction of, finance, accounting, and sales, and the operability of those two and how they interact. But I'd say primarily it's been marketing recently.
Are you just kind of a one-person do-it-all team, or do you have other people working for you, or are you thinking of just keeping it as yourself?
So I do a lot of kind of like run, make sure everything's in place. I have a team with me. I work a lot with, I have a team of solid, tried and true contractors. When it comes on the marketing side, very experienced in terms of digital, online, promoting and having reputations in different communities on Reddit, especially when it comes to blockchain. So it just depends on the project in terms of how big of a team you'll work with. It's been as big as 12, but typically I'll bring on 5 people with me for kind of like your standard engagement.
Okay,
yeah, it
cool.
makes sense. So it's like an agency model, and you kind of scale when you need to get big, and then you bring on more people as you need them, and you hire for the job to get the job done. Is that fair? Is that a fair assessment?
Yep, that's exactly how I do it.
That's perfect. All right.
Well,
thanks for the call.
Yeah, well, PJ, it was great talking to you today. I think me and Josh learned a lot. I hope our listeners learned a lot as well. And we'll leave you with the last word. Do you have any last closing comments or things you'd like to say?
Yeah, no, I just want to thank the both of you for having me on here and this opportunity. And it's been great having this conversation. And, I look forward to seeing blockchain and Bitcoin become more ever present and, throughout the globe. So I just want to do my small part, and I'm glad you guys are doing yours.
All right, great. Well, until next time, Josh and I will see you on the dark side of the HODLmoon. HODLmoon! Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, like, share, and comment to maintain your geosynchronous orbit over the dark side of the HODLmoon.